20th century witnessed the rise of two dominant authoritarian ideologies, communism and fascism. Both sought to create a powerful state, suppress opposition, and reshape society according to their ideological visions. However, despite some superficial similarities, these two systems were fundamentally opposed in their economic structures, social philosophies, and long-term objectives. Communism, inspired by Marxist thought, aimed at creating a classless society by abolishing private property and establishing collective ownership. Fascism, on the other hand, was a hyper-nationalist, militaristic ideology that emphasized the supremacy of the state, social hierarchy, and the role of a charismatic leader. This essay explores the key differences between these two authoritarian models by examining their ideological foundations, economic systems, political structures, and societal impacts. Ideological foundations. Communism finds its roots in the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, particularly the Communist Manifesto, 1848. Marxist thought argues that history is shaped by class struggle, with capitalism being the latest stage of oppression. Communists believe in a proletarian revolution, where workers overthrow the capitalist class and establish a dictatorship of the proletariat, leading to a stateless, classless society. Leninism, Stalinism, and Maoism were variations of communism that adapted Marxist principles to real-world politics. Fascism, in contrast, emerged in the early 20th century, primarily through the ideologies of Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany. It rejected both liberal democracy and communism, advocating for a highly centralized, nationalist, and militaristic state. Unlike communism, which sought international revolution, fascism focused on nationalism, racial superiority in the case of Nazi Germany, and strong leadership. The fascist state demanded absolute loyalty from its citizens and glorified war, expansion, and state control over every aspect of life. One of the most significant differences between communism and fascism lies in their economic approaches. Communist economies are characterized by state ownership of all industries and means of production, a planned economy where production, wages, and distribution are controlled by the government, elimination of private property and market competition, equal distribution of resources, at least in theory. In practice, communist states like the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin and China under Mao Zedong implemented 5-year plans to control economic growth. These policies often led to inefficiencies, shortages, and widespread poverty. The lack of individual incentives hindered innovation and productivity, while government mismanagement often resulted in economic crises, such as the Great Chinese Famine 1959 to 1961. Fascist economies, on the other hand, retained private property and capitalism, but placed them under strict state control. Key features included corporatism, where the state, businesses, and labor unions worked together under government direction, heavy military investment, prioritizing industrial production for war, suppression of workers' rights and independent labor unions, protectionist policies that favored national industries. Both Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy implemented policies of state capitalism, where industries remained private but operated under government directives. Unlike communism, fascism allowed economic elites to thrive, provided they remained loyal to the regime. Political structures. Both communism and fascism rejected liberal democracy and favored authoritarian rule, but their political structures had distinct differences. In communist states, power was concentrated in the hands of the Communist Party, which claimed to represent the proletariat. Leaders like Stalin, Mao, and Fidel Castro established single-party rule, with strict ideological control over politics and society. Political dissent was not tolerated, and purges, secret police, and forced labor camps, such as the Soviet gulags, were used to eliminate opposition. Fascist states also practiced one-party rule, but unlike communists, they emphasized charismatic leadership and cult of personality. Fascist leaders like Hitler and Mussolini presented themselves as national saviors, using propaganda to maintain their grip on power. While communist parties ruled through bureaucratic structures, fascist leaders ruled through personal loyalty, military force, and mass mobilization. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments or additional information. Societal impacts. Both communism and fascism sought to create a new society, but their methods and goals differed. Communist regimes promoted equality in theory, aiming to eradicate class distinctions. They often targeted the wealthy elite, landlords, and religious institutions as enemies of progress. While they promoted education and literacy, they also enforced strict censorship, political indoctrination, and mass surveillance. Fascist regimes, in contrast, promoted hierarchical social structures. They emphasized national identity, militarism, and racial purity. In Nazi Germany, this resulted in the Holocaust, where millions of Jews, Romani people, disabled individuals, and other minorities were exterminated. Fascist Italy and Francoist Spain promoted traditional family values and sought to reinforce gender roles, restricting women's rights and emphasizing their role as mothers. While both systems relied on state propaganda, secret police, and repression, fascism glorified national strength and racial superiority, whereas communism sought to create a universal workers' state. Shash. Key similarities. Despite their differences, communism and fascism shared several similarities. 1. One-party rule. Both rejected multi-party democracy and tolerated no opposition. 2. Suppression of civil liberties. Free speech, independent press, and political dissent were not allowed. 3. State propaganda. Governments controlled media and used it to shape public opinion. 4. Expansionist policies. Both engaged in aggressive expansion, e.g. Soviet control over Eastern Europe, Nazi conquests. 5. Use of terror and violence. Secret police, labor camps, and executions were common in both regimes. Key differences. Legacy and historical consequences. Both communism and fascism had profound impacts on the 20th century. Communist states like the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba reshaped global politics, but economic inefficiencies and state repression led to widespread dissatisfaction. By the late 20th century, most communist regimes either collapsed, as in Eastern Europe, or reformed, as in China. Fascism, on the other hand, led to World War II, the Holocaust, and the destruction of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The defeat of fascism in 1945 left communism as the dominant authoritarian ideology, leading to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. By the end of the 20th century, fascism had been largely discredited, while communist states either adapted to capitalism, China, Vietnam, or collapsed, Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc countries. However, authoritarian tendencies inspired by both ideologies continue to influence politics today. Conclusion. Communism and fascism were two of the most influential and destructive political ideologies of the 20th century. While both systems rejected democracy and individual freedoms, their economic policies, social structures, and political goals were fundamentally different. Communism aimed at a classless society, whereas fascism reinforced hierarchical nationalism. Both models relied on authoritarian control, repression, and propaganda, ultimately leading to immense human suffering. Despite their decline, elements of both ideologies continue to shape global politics, serving as reminders of the dangers of extreme authoritarianism. Understanding their histories helps us recognize the warning signs of oppressive regimes and defend democratic principles.